Hey, it's Double Switches. I'm back again with a playstyle analysis about stall this week. I brought a friend with me. His name is Webcam Pair, so hopefully he'll break up my monotonous voice.
Stall is by far one of the most controversial archetypes out there in Pokemon. Whether you despise it or love it, it's hard to deny its effectiveness. Stall is a battle of attrition and primarily wins through residual damage over the course of a game. The team is built around walls that are able to take hits and recover any damage they might take. Meanwhile, your opponent will become pressured by the large set of residual tools at Stall's disposal. They could be losing health through hazards, status, losing PP, or even losing the will to play. If you couldn't tell yet, Stall plays the long game, and it requires both time and concentration. It's a relatively simple playstyle in terms of team building, because so much is already established and there is little variation in teams. There is, of course, a heavy dependency on pilot strength, as it requires one to be able to constantly be in a state where your opponent cannot set up or start breaking threats, as well as keeping everything healthy. Mega Sableye is at the core of every good Stall team. It's difficult to build a good Stall team without it. Its solid defensive stats and stellar typing make it extremely difficult to break past, but that's only a small portion of why it's used. Mega Sableye's main utility is in its ability to prevent hazards with Magic Bounce. The constant looming threat of Magic Bounce makes it hard for your opponent to set up entry hazards, as they can easily be punished by Magic Bounce and end up on their own side. Sableye's defensive typing is incredibly strong, with only one weakness in Fairy. It has Recover, so it can constantly stay healthy, Will-O-Wisp to cripple physical attackers, and Knock Off to punish switches. Fourth slot is more of a flex pick that usually ends up being Protect. Overall, there is really no reason not to run Sableye, as it's Stall's best option for a Mega.
Next up is Chauncey. Sorta hard to get around this one as well. It just has so much HP and a great SPDF stat. Its defensive stat is lackluster, but it's covered up nicely by Eviolite. Chauncey is your best option for a rocker, and it also has the best move in the game, T-Wave. Chauncey gets Soft Will for recovery, and Seismic Toss, so it's not entirely fodder for taunt. It's just too fat to not put on a team. It's the best SPDF wall in the game, and it also has an ability that prevents it from staying status. Its typing is perfect for its sky-high defensive stats, only boasting one weakness in fighting.
Next up is the primary defensive wall, with your best option being Skarmory. Skarmory has great physical defenses, but the biggest reason to use it is its typing. It's able to laugh in the face of things like Excadrill and Pinsir, who can otherwise shred Stall, and hit back hard with Counter or Brave Bird. It also gets Defog as a secondary check to hazards, and Recovery in Roost. Your last slot is Whirlwind in order to phase out setup sweepers, and Sturdy ensures you always live that first hit. Other options include things like Spikes, Rocks, and even Toxic.
The next slot has some variants. It's small, but it does exist. It's gonna be your Unaware wall. Setup sweepers are a constant threat to any stall team in the meta, but Unaware completely shuts that down. In this spot, you have a choice between Clefable and Quagsire, but in the current meta, it's heavily favoring Clefable. For this reason, we're just gonna talk about Clefable because Quag has almost faded out of the meta completely. Clefable isn't incredibly bulky, but it does have just enough bulk to where almost no setup sweepers are able to 2-hit KO it. You typically want to run Wish Protect for constant recovery, Moonblast as your mono attack, and generally you run Heal Bell in the last slot in case anything on your team is status.
These last two slots are where your main variation comes in. This one in particular we're going to talk about our Glue Wall. Typically, this team member is there to cover threats that your other walls don't adequately deal with, for instance, or Corona. Right now, it is very common to run Toxapex in this spot. It has good defensive stats and a great ability in Regenerator. It can set up layers of Toxic Spikes and haze setup sweepers or wall breakers like Volcarona and Greninja. People have used things like Amoonguss and Alola in this spot as well, but after it's released, people realized how strong Toxapex is in the current meta. Typically, Toxapex runs Recover, Haste to prevent it from being set up fodder, Scald for utility, and Toxic or Toxic Spikes to whittle things over time.
The last and arguably most important slot fulfills both the role of a revenge killer and that of a wall breaker. There are certain breakers like Hoopa and Tapu Lele that will run through stall teams if they are given a chance. We use trappers like Dugtrio, Weavile, or rarely Tyranitar to catch and eliminate these threats, and to minimize the damage that those mons can do down to one mon. Dugtrio tends to be the best of these options. Arena Trap combined with its sky-high speed and attack stats let it trap a great deal of breakers. Don't mistake Dugtrio for something it isn't, though. Dugtrio's role is to trap threats to your team and nothing else. It doesn't have the power to take on threats like Subcoil Zygarde and Tapu Bulu. You run EQ as your primary stab and Sash to lift a hit. The rest of the set is very flexible. You can run Screech, Reversal, Sucker Punch, Edge, Pursuit, Air Slash, and even Stealth Rocks in a pinch.
Now that we've covered your basic stall team in Sun and Moon OU, it's important to consider that there are other variants of stall. They have just heavily fallen out of favour. One method of stalling is Pressure Stall, and it's built on TP stalling the opponent through the use of the ability Pressure. Typically, these sorts of teams run things like Zapdos, Suicune, and even Kyurem. Another variant that was pretty popular, especially during the Dugtrio suspect that wasn't Diglett Stall, was Shedinja Stall, which used Shedinja as a pivot. Shedinja can discourage a lot of otherwise threatening breakers and can set up on mons that can't touch it.
The team that we described earlier is the most common stall team currently in the meta, but you can make adjustments on that by substituting in other walls that fulfill a similar role. You can run something like Porygon 2 over Chauncey, or something like Weavile over Dougie. There is variation, but there is always heavy preference to one specific team because certain walls simply outclass their counterparts. That doesn't mean that other teams can't be successful, they're just less tried and tested. Like every archetype, there are always people who are willing to defy the status quo with innovations like Bulu Stall and Kyurem Stall that have been successful in the past.
I'd like to briefly talk about the stall vs stall matchup here. Stall has an interesting time in mirror matches. They're usually slow-paced and boring. The key to beating the opposing stall player is trapping Chauncey with your Dugtrio. After that, it becomes much easier to win.
Now we can get into the more complicated part, that being how to use a team. The general idea is try to keep all your mons healthy, and when you have the chance, throw out a Toxic, Hazards, or an attack. While keeping everything healthy, you also have to make sure your opponent doesn't get out of hand with setup or hazards. This is why Unaware and Hazard Prevention mons are almost a necessity. You don't need to worry about killing anything bar wall breakers. Be wary of a few key wall breaking threats like Hoopa and Lele, and save your revenge killer for them. Once they are gone, just focus on occasional whittle and staying healthy. Eventually your opponent will get worn down from the hazards and status. At that point you should just wait around till they lose. It's not a fast playstyle, and you will have to wait. But once you get past their wall breakers, it's hard to lose. Stall isn't easy by any means though. You have to manage the health of so many mons at once, keeping the opponent mons in check, as well as having to constantly stay in good matchups. It's a lot of things to consider, and people can very easily get overwhelmed.
In conclusion, Stall is an incredibly effective playstyle if it is used correctly. Team building is simple and you can generally find teams quite easily. Check the description of this video for more Stall related resources.